Welcome to Living from the Soul. This is your host, Sam Terode, and today I'm thrilled to be speaking with David Ditchfield. David has one of the best stories I've ever heard. In 2007, David was in a horrible train accident. After he was transported to the hospital, he left his body and had a near-death experience, or NDE. This ended up changing his life in profound, surprising, and lasting ways. I don't want to give away too much in this introduction, so I'll simply say that David is the author of a memoir titled Shine On, and his website, which you should visit, is shineonthestory.com. And now, I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with David Ditchfield.
Hi, Sam.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Well, I read your book, Shine On, last summer, and when I started this podcast, you were one of my dream guests, one of the first people I wanted to invite.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. I remember you buying it. Yes, so thank you so much. You did a really lovely review as well.
Well, Shine On is such a page turner. It's a very exciting book, but also very emotional. Even rereading it this week, I teared up a few times at parts.
Oh, brilliant. No, that's cool. Yeah. Quite a few people have said that they tear up, they get quite emotional about it, which is amazing, because you just don't know what to expect. I mean, I kind of put myself right into it and put everything that was real, my real emotions that came through. And I guess at the end of the day, real emotions are the ones that hit you, aren't they? They're the ones.
Yeah.
Well, they do with me, anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the characters are also so interesting. Of course, they're real people, but there's your ex-girlfriend and your two buddies from the pub.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Matt and Jimmy. Yeah, they're all essential. They're all essential to the whole makeup of the whole story. Basically, of the before and after of the whole of my life, really. So yeah,
Right.
That's why I decided to add them to the story.
And then there's Anna, kind of you might call her a love interest in the story, or there's a quality of you don't know what your relationship is going to be as you read the book. It has a lot of ups and downs.
Yes, yeah. No, so there was a very special relationship going on there, and so that was very sort of like that was the core element that I wanted to take throughout the whole book and take you on that journey.
Well, I know you had a co-writer for the book. What was your writing process like? How did you create it?
Well, it all started because basically I'm dyslexic, so I'd wanted to write my story for some time, but I thought, how am I going to get around this? And then it was just, I say coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in things now in synchronicity, that things suddenly come into your path for a reason. And it was a friend who I'd known from years back suddenly came back into my life, and we got chatting, and so she offered to sort of co-write it with me. So why don't we do this together? We've got to get that story written. So that's how it all came about. And the process was very intense. There was an awful lot, hours and hours of interviews with her, me talking with her, recordings, and me. Then I'd get another text from her saying, look, what about this bit? Could you just send me a sort of like a voice memo or whatever? So I'd do that. So I'd send extra bits as well. So there was just, but we got to the stage where really my co-writer was actually said that she felt like she was in my mind, and she was there. She was kind of like, we connected. She was channeling basically just as much as I was, as that book came together. So that's how it all happened.
Yeah, the level of detail, it's almost like a novel, the way it's written.
Yes, I know that's the way it seemed to come out eventually. We had no master plan. We just kind of, just started working on it, and it sort of found its own feet and its in its own energy, and it became what it became. And so, a lot of people like that element of it being almost reading like a novel. So, yeah.
Well, what was your life like before your accident? Did you have any interest in creative pursuits like writing, painting, and music?
Not really. I mean, I'd I'd always enjoyed drawing and stuff when I was at school, like a lot of us, and I really did. But I'd left school without qualifications because of my dyslexia, and so there was no chance I was going to ever pursue anything like that. And music-wise, I joined like a band when I moved to London, and I taught myself guitar, but it was very basic, 3-chord wonder sort of thrashing out these songs, with people. So nothing at all like the ability that I went on to gain after my near-death experience. But also my life was very much, as I say, I moved to London, so obviously, like all capital cities, it's very expensive to live there, and it's very competitive. And the only work I was really picking up was mainly sort of manual labouring, blue collar work. So it was very sort of cap in hand, day to day, sort of, And so I was too exhausted. By the end of the day, I used to end up going to the local pub where we talk about, Matt and Jimmy in the story, and because that was also like basically that was like my office, if you like. That was where I would go and sort of like hustle for work, because all the guys who were running the building sites would go to this one bar, and we'd all end up in there. So there was no time to do anything other than work and go to the bar, and next day you're back at work again. So yeah.
Did you grow up in a religious family?
Well, my parents were Christian, and they took us all to church. My family, when I was young, when I was really young, and I didn't really enjoy it. Funnily enough, I said to my mom, I said, "Look, Mom, I'm really struggling with this. I don't really feel comfortable in going to church, and I don't get it, And she said, "That's fine." She was very chilled and said that you can stay at home. So I did. And so I used to be the one who would stay at home each week, each Sunday. So I was never an atheist. It wasn't like that. I wasn't this kind of like, like, this is complete rubbish. I just didn't get it, and it didn't communicate anything to me. So I didn't really have any faith at all. So I was very non-spiritual. My life was really just all about just going from one day to the next, and not really acknowledging any sort of spiritual aspects in my life whatsoever, really. Yeah.
Mm. And would you say you were an alcoholic?
Yeah, I would call myself at the time anyway, a functioning alcoholic, because the drink got the better of me. It was really consuming me. That in the end, I couldn't go without it on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And it also was like a lot of people who become it that way. It broke me. I was penniless. I had no money left in the end, because it was like all the money I was earning from these day-to-day jobs was just getting spent on alcohol. So it was a vicious circle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then it was Anna who you met at the pub, right? Who you ended up spending time with, and you were saying goodbye to her on the train platform on that fateful day.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't really met her that long before all this happened. Funny enough, but we had this connection instantly, and I just thought, wow, this is like there's something really special here, and it was more than just a sort of like a physical attraction. It was like there was this, we just had this connection, and we just got on really well. And I'd I'd lost my apartment, and I had to move out. And my sister, who lived in Cambridge with her family, said, "Look, why don't you just come and stay with us?" So that's how I ended up being there. And then Anna came to hang out with me for a few days. And so it was when she had to go back to London that I took her to the rail station, that I was involved in this really awful accident. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I'm a pretty nervous person, so I usually imagine the worst case scenario when I'm at a place like a subway station or a train platform. I imagine accidents happening, but you actually lived the worst case scenario.
I did indeed, yeah, and I know what you mean. I mean, when I lived in London, there were quite a few people would go under the suicide attempts. Would throw themselves under subway trains. And I used to think, oh man, that poor soul. So it used to really affect me whenever that happened. It's yeah, it's. I don't think it's something that you surviving it. I realise now that the mind, body, and soul should not be put through something so traumatic as that. It's just too much to deal with. I mean, I had to have an awful lot of therapy afterwards, which is also in the book, because I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And, obviously I'd had all my issues with alcohol. So, there was a lot to fix really after it, because it's a huge thing. I mean, it still is. Obviously it's changed my life for the better, what happened to me, but I still feel the effects of that accident to this day. Yeah, it's pretty big.
Yeah. Would you like to describe the accident for those who haven't heard, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Yeah. Well, I'll start from basically I was helping my friend Anna onto the train with her bags, and I was giving her a kiss and a hug to say goodbye, and we heard the emergency buzzers go for the doors to close. And as I stepped back, the bottom part of my coat, it was like a sheepskin coat, just got caught and it got trapped in the doors. And I couldn't pull it free because it was like a thick quality thing. And it wasn't going to come out. I looked around to see if there was a guard on the platform, but there was no one there. They didn't use guards on this particular station, which I had no idea. So I just yelled at the top of my voice for help. Then the engine started to rev up, and I thought, oh no, this is not good. And I just I looked into the eyes of Anna through the glass, and I just saw the look of absolute sheer hopelessness and terror in her eyes. And that made me stop and figure at that point, I don't think I'm going to survive this. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die, So the train started to pull out of the station at tremendous speed. You don't realize just how fast they actually go. When you're inside, you get your cell phone out and start tapping away, and after you go. But when it's on the outside of the train, it's a different story. I felt every gear shift, and I felt that pull, and then I lost my footing, got dragged along the platform, and I got pulled between the space of the platform edge and the train itself, and then down into this kind of dark, it felt like this dark sort of pit of hell. It was just like I was thrown around relentlessly like a rag doll, and it was very violent and extremely painful. And I was fully conscious throughout the whole thing. And I just, I remembered, it's funny, but time stretched, and it was interesting. And that happens quite a lot with people when they go through life-threatening incidents like this. And I was able to actually stop and think how I could survive this, because I was determined to survive. And I'd seen a news article a few weeks previous where a small child had been thrown from a burning apartment block and had survived without any injuries. And they said that's because infants are relaxed, and we adults, we all tense ourselves up in a crisis. So I thought, just relax your body. So I did, and I just kind of allowed myself to relax. And I figured that helped me an awful lot. But ultimately, I realized that there was something far greater than me and that machine, that train, and the whole event that saved my life that day. So the train moved on eventually, and there I was, just lying. Yeah, thankfully, I got thrown between the tracks as the train still relentlessly cracked on there above my head, and then it just disappeared into the distance. Yeah.
Yeah, you describe in the book how your consciousness transcends time at that point, and you're able to have all these thoughts and think calmly within yourself. Is that how it happened?
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Which seems really strange, because you would think in a moment of something like that you would just panic. I mean, maybe some people would do. I don't know, but it was just something. As I say, something far greater than me was at play that day. I think I was helped. I was being helped for sure, and I was being calmed for sure. So I was able to just relax and think it through. I remember actually thinking. I remember as I lay down in between the tracks as the train carried on, I still knew it wasn't over yet. I could get hit by some part of the undercarriage, and I just thought. I remembered all the hero films I could seen, like Indiana Jones or 007, James Bond, and I thought, what would they do now? And they would keep their face right down into the gravel. So that's exactly what I did.
Well, it's amazing to have that kind of presence of mind.
Yeah, It's survival, basically, and it's a survival technique. But as I say, I was being helped as well. I was being kept calm.
Yeah, and then it was interesting. You described being in shock. So your first thought was to pull out your cell phone and try to call someone.
That's right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then you noticed that your arm had been gashed open.
Yeah. My arm had been, that thick sheepskin coat was ripped. It was torn right open, and so was my arm, and I could see all the insides of my arm. I remember thinking, but again, I didn't really panic or freak out at that point. I remember actually saying to myself, wow, that's me. I could see all the tendons, all the workings within my arm. And I thought, that's me inside my arm. That's been with me all my life, and I could see how it all works. And it was almost like a moment of fascination, which sounds bizarre, but that's where I was at. Obviously, I couldn't use the cell phone, and it was pretty much at that point. Anyhow, the emergency guys arrived. They were there really quick, because there was a hospital just around the corner, a small hospital. So they jumped down on the track, and then they started cutting through my clothes and got me on a stretcher. I don't know how they got me still off that track and onto the platform, because it's like a huge drop. It's like a sort of, yeah, as we all know when we look at train platforms. So anyway, but they did, and then they rushed me into the back of an ambulance, and I remember the doctor in the back of the ambulance said, "Look, there is a hospital around the corner, but the one that's really going to save you is quite a journey. It's going to be a 20-minute drive. Can you hang on?" I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we did. And I'm so glad I did, because it was an amazing hospital. It's one of the best in the country. And when I arrived, there was a whole team of medics who were waiting for me in the emergency department there, and I just saw them all there. I thought, wow, this is pretty serious, And they just started working on me straight away, and they sounded really quite scared. I could hear fear in their voices. I couldn't understand what they were talking about, because it was all, science, sort of going backwards and forwards. And I thought, this doesn't sound too good. So I was still kind of in a state of like wondering whether I was going to survive this or not, because I was losing so much blood by that point, and I was in an awful lot of pain.
Were you rushed right into surgery then on your arm?
They were about to take me right in, yeah. And then the surgeon came out and said, he was talking to me. He said, "Look, your family have just arrived." I was going, "Really?" And I was going, "Yeah." And he said, "Would you like to see them before we take you in?" I said, "Yeah." So I remember they came in, and Anna was there as well. So I was just so pleased to see her, because I was so concerned about her. I was just really was, because we'd just been through this whole thing together, really. And I knew that she'd have to watch the whole thing unfold. And obviously, she was just sat there looking completely torn, with shock. So I spoke to her briefly and said, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And she said, "I can't believe you're alive. I just saw you go under." And funnily enough, she said, when you rolled, I ran through and watched you through the window, and you just rolled under with such grace." I said, "I know why." So yeah, and then it was pretty much at that point that I left my body. I sort of I went from all that trauma in the hospital and that high anxiety to a really calm and beautiful place, and it it immediately made me feel comforted, and all the pain had gone, and all the anxiety had gone, and it was just great, And I did actually fear at that point that I died. I thought, okay, I didn't make it. This is it. I'm dead, and I've moved on. I didn't fight it or resist it. I know that I've obviously read other accounts since, and some people do try to resist it, because they say, "Oh, I've got kids and I want to get back, and I don't want it's not my time yet," But I didn't want to die, but I was, after all I'd been through, just felt brilliant just to be in this wonderful, comforting place. So I just kind of laid back and tried to get my bearings and see where I was. And the first thing I noticed was I was almost being greeted, if you like, by these beautiful orbs of colours. They were like slowly pulsating. They're just around me, and they were like landing lights in an airport, but slowly pulsating. So that calmed me. And then I looked around, and I suddenly realised I was now laid on what appeared to be like a huge slate rock. It was like a big medieval altar almost, and um, interestingly enough, I felt very comfortable on it, and I realized at that point I was no longer clothed, but I still felt comfortable.
Wow. So you could physically feel the rock beneath you?
Yeah, I could, because that's one thing I'll always remember, is that the comfort of being able to lay back on this rock, because it's an odd thing, because my physical being was obviously back in the hospital, but I still felt like me. It felt like that I'd carried on into another journey, and I felt like I was still in my own body. In fact, I was, because as I looked down, I looked to check my wounds, and everything was healed. My left arm that had been severed was now completely back in place, and not even a scratch. I was just covered in this lovely blue sort of cloth. It was like a sort of satin, sort of silk material, and that made me, again, I remember the texture of that feeling comfortable on me and very comforting. I I laid my head back, and as I did, I remember looking up, and I saw these three grids of white light that slowly came in towards me, and I couldn't take my gaze out of that light, even though it was like intensely bright. It was something that I could look straight into, which was unusual, and I knew this wasn't the normal sort of light I've been used to. And it was more than just a light. It felt like it was healing me. I felt like there was a healing energy coming from this light. So I allowed myself to sort of just bathe in this light for some time. Yeah.
And did this seem ethereal and dreamlike, or like concrete reality, like you talking with me right now?
Yeah, it's concrete, just like you and I are talking, and I would describe it as being ultra real, because it's like you're there, and you're experiencing everything that's going on, and not only that, I was very keen to. It's like I was like a child just learning for the first time. When children, you see them gazing around and stuff. I was like that, and all my anxiety issues that I carried with me throughout my life, all those are gone, and there was no sense of fear. There was no sense of worrying about the past or the future. I was just in the here and now, and basically, I realized that this was the pure essence of my soul that was there, and I went on to discover that there were. I felt the presence of somebody there at that point, and I remember lifting my head, and when I did, I saw a person just stood at my feet, a very beautiful sort of androgynous being, with this pure white blonde hair and this skin that was just like shining from within, like this light coming from this being. But the interesting thing was that he or she was just wearing a contemporary black t-shirt, nothing too ethereal. And I just thought, wow, I know you, don't I? I know you. And I actually said, who are you? I know you. And he or she just kept smiling back at me very reassuringly. And I felt that this person was guarding me. This was my kind of my soul keeper, And I thought, okay, I just went with it. Then I laid back, and I just felt us again. The presence of somebody else had arrived, and there were two more people. They were either side of me in female form, and one was kind of white European, I guess, and with basically very long brown hair, and then the girl to my left was more Asian. Indian Asian or American Indian, and in appearance, wearing like a very traditional dress, a very sort of creamy white color. And they both had their hands hovering over my body, and their hands. There was energy coming from their hands, and it was like the energy from the light, but it was a lot more intense because it was just their hands were very close to my body, and I felt like they were healing my body, the trauma that it had been through, but more they were healing all the wounds psychologically or whatever, all the emotional wounds, if you like, that I'd carried throughout my life, and they were just peeling off all those layers and getting down to this pure essence of me, the real me, who I was. So
Wow.
yeah,
Would you say that was an experience of your soul?
I would I would say that it was a cleansing of my soul. Really, it was just it's just because I realised now that I'd gone through life basically punishing my own soul, because I'd felt like like a lot of us do. I'm not alone in this. I've realized now since that my book's come out that a lot of us go through life feeling like we're not good enough, feeling like we're not up to the mark, and we look at others and thinking, wow, they're so successful and I'm not, and so we turn on ourselves. And I've been doing that throughout my whole life. I really didn't give myself a break, and I suddenly in this space realized that I was okay. I wasn't that awful person that I was perceived myself to be. I wasn't that terrible failure, and it wasn't my fault either. All the things that had gone wrong in my life were not my fault, and it was just a beautiful feeling to have that, it was just great.
Hmm. Some people who go through a near-death experience have a life review where they see different parts of their life. Did you have that, or more just the sense of your entire life?
It was a sense, because a lot of mine was telepathy, and I know what you're talking about. Obviously, since I've had mine, I've realised other people have had the life review, and I figured that I didn't have that life review because often the life reviews that I've read about, anyhow, it's normally when people have been, pretty awful to other people or what have you, and so they experience the pain that they've given those people and then they kind of, it's like a sort of moment of redemption, if you like. But like I said, it was really only me that I was attacking throughout my whole life. So I didn't go for that life review. I mean, every experience is different, and I feel that what I gained from mine was the feeling of self-love and self-worth, and that's what I was being shown. That's what I was being given. And also, lots of lessons. I learned that we're all very much a part of the universe, and that had never occurred to me before, but now I feel a strong sense of that, that the universe is part of our energy, and motivates us, and helps us to make things grow in our lives and accumulate. Because there was one point where I'd actually started thinking about my family down in the hospital, and I say down because I felt like I was up in the universe itself, and I figured I'd look to see how they were doing, because I thought, well, they were pretty torn apart by what had happened. I thought they're going to be really upset now because clearly I'm dead, So I looked over the edge of this huge rock, hoping to see them, and when I looked over, I didn't see them at all, but what I saw was this absolutely beautiful sight. It was like a huge waterfall of stars. It was like an awesome sort of display of all these millions of stars that were like cascading over the edge. Instead of water droplets, they were just beautiful sparkling stars. And it was like the size of Niagara, so it was very, very huge.
Wow.
And as I looked down into the middle, I could see my vision started to expand the further I looked, and I started to see, it looked like I was going from one galaxy into another. And then I looked down and I could see beautiful nebulas, beautiful colors that I went on to paint, and that was amazing. So it was at that point where I very much knew that I was very much a part of the universe, and I was definitely floating around in it on this huge rock. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. That's great. I'd like to read a line that stood out to me from your book. You say the Renaissance painters got it wrong when they painted the creator as a bearded man poised in the sky. They should have painted the light instead. The light is the bringer of everything and the place where all things return. This is the source of all love. This is life itself.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what I feel. That was one of the most profound moments, really, of the whole experience, was seeing the tunnel of white light. And I know that pretty much everybody who has near-death experiences talk about that tunnel. Some people say they actually enter it, which I didn't. That wasn't for me in my experience. But when I saw it, it was like I felt the energy of it first before I'd actually seen it, because I was still laid back, and I lifted my head, and I saw this huge tunnel of white light, and it was just slowly coming in across through the universe and coming towards me and slowly closing in. I thought, wow, look at this. And there was like all these incredible dramatic flames that were slowly cascading around the edge, slowly drifting around. And it was pretty sort of awe-inspiring to look at. But I had no sense of fear. I was more like I just like thinking, wow, this is just incredible, and the energy was the energy that was coming from the hands of the healers, the angels, and also the energy from those lights. But it was just turned up, like the dial had been turned up tenfold, and it was the energy of love that was coming towards me. And I knew at that point, I just said to myself, this is the source of all creation I'm looking at. This is God. This is not the image that I'd always been used to being perceiving throughout my whole life. So so that was a profound moment indeed.
Wow. It seems that a lot of mystics through the ages have had similar experiences, and they call it the uncreated light that they've seen in their visions. But then religions take these experiences and turn it into dogmas and creeds and lists of things to believe, which is what you heard in church as a child, and that gets boring really fast when you have no experience to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, I've with churches. I mean, there's a lot of really lovely people go to church, and I think it's great that they do, and they have a faith, and that they're all aiming towards one thing, whatever their religion,
Mhm.
and which is goodness and love. But obviously these things can get, I mean, I talked to my parents about it afterwards. It took me about a week to tell them about my experience, because them being Christians, I thought they're not going to get this, and I really want them to. I want them to understand what had happened. And interestingly enough, when I told my parents in hospital, they listened very intently, and then when I finished, my mum turned around very quietly and she said, "We know." And I said, "You know? How do you know, Mum?" And she said, "Well, um, whenever we come in, you because I've got this room to myself in the hospital." And she said, "We walk into this room and you've got all these tubes coming out of you and you can't move, but you're just giving out all this energy to the nurses around you and anybody who walks in, and you're just glowing." And it's this, so they kind of knew that there's some kind of spiritual warmth that was helping me and stuff. So they got it. But I said, does this ever get discussed in your church? Do you have people? Do they talk about the afterlife? And they say, no, not really. Not only really the resurrection of Christ ever really gets talked about. So that kind of surprised me. I thought that's a shame. Because it would be. I think that it should be talked about a bit more. Because I think just not in churches. I think generally speaking, death is not. We don't talk about it, which is crazy because it's going to come to us all eventually. So we may as well just have a little. We don't have to talk about it every day, but we could at least address it like we address everything else, like birth and marriage, and even taking our driving tests and stuff. But we prepare for all those things. So I think it wouldn't hurt sometimes just to try and look into these. So many people have had near-death experiences, which is amazing. So it's been taken a lot more seriously now, which is great. This is what I'm realizing. Yeah.
Yeah. In America, what most people hear in church is, oh, you have to believe certain things in order to get to a heavenly afterlife instead of falling into hell.
Yeah, I know. I don't believe in all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a strange idea to me that it would be based on what we intellectually believe in this life or profess to believe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, I went through my whole life was all based around guilt, and I felt guilty all the time because I felt like a failure. So guilt is such an awful thing to carry around with you, and I think that if that comes into any faith at all, then that's not good. Really. It's negative. I feel, and sometimes that does, because if you're feeling that, if you're feeling like I've got to be a good person if I'm going to make it through to heaven, then we're not all going to be good people. It's not possible to be. It's not feasible just to be good all the time. Well, some people can, but but I think generally speaking, there's going to be things that we're going to make mistakes on, and we're going to feel, oh, I'm not going to make it to heaven now, am I? So yeah.
Some people have the idea that only a certain group will get to heaven or get to experience this. Only
Yeah.
their tribe or people who believe the same things. But when people like you actually have a near-death experience and glimpse this, I don't hear them coming back and saying, oh, it was limited to a certain group of people.
Yeah, yeah, not at all. You don't get that sense. I mean, to me, uh, on the other side, as I call it, there's no judgment. You're not being judged at all. That's what was lovely about it. For the first time in my life, I felt like, wow, nobody's judging me here. All they're doing is giving me love. They just love me, and they just want to give me all this love. And I carry that with me now. It's still with me, and it's something I wish we could all feel and realize. Because there's just so much love there, and there's no judgment. You're not as I used to say, you don't get to heaven's gate and then you sort of like they say, okay, you're in, and no, he's not. He's going downstairs. It's nothing like that at all. And everyone pretty much I've spoken to or heard about has had near-death experiences. They all say that. They talk about the love, the unconditional love. That's what it is. It's unconditional. It's just like what I felt was all the different types of love I've had throughout my life, whether it's through my parents or my lovers or my pet cats or dogs, or all the different types of love that you experience. It was all there, and it was all condensed and coming through. It was so powerful that I remember, especially when I saw the tunnel of light and the love that was coming from that. I felt like every single molecule in my body was like vibrating with energy of love. It's just really powerful. And so, yeah.
I was describing my interest in near-death experiences to someone the other day, and they said, well, what about people who die and have a vision of hell or an experience of hell? And I said, well, I haven't heard very many of those, but the handful that I've heard about or read, I wonder if it has to do with their state of consciousness at the time that they die. They might need to pass through a purging process. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, well, I guess again, I think it's that a lot of that is maybe down to the resistance issue, where people are resisting it, where they feel like they're going, they feel like they're dying, and they don't want to do it. So they're pushing back. So it's like anything that we do in our lives, isn't it? If we don't want to do something and we start kicking, going, no, I'm not doing this. It's going to be a struggle, and it's not going to be easy. So that's probably what an awful lot of that is to do. I saw an interview with a group of people recently when they were talking about death, and they weren't talking about near-death experiences, but I was part of a series of films that was dealing with death. My section was talking about near-death experiences, but the next film that I saw was interviewing people who were terminally ill in hospices with cancer. And and they interviewed this one guy, and he didn't know anything about NDEs at all, but he was chatting about how he'd been in hospital recently and he'd had a bad turn, and he said I felt I was going in and out of consciousness. And the way he described it, he wasn't actually saying that he was like he saw the light or anything like that, but I could tell that he was just about to go. He was about to go into an NDE, but he was resisting it. He was going, I was not going to give in. I was going to live. I got my kids to live for, but it was this awful experience. So for him, it was like, all the gears were grinding. So I figure that's probably an awful lot to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you say now, are you afraid to die again, or have you lost that fear of death?
No, I've lost that fear of death. Yeah, right from the off, and so it's purely because I realise now that the soul lives on. The soul's too far a powerful entity just to suddenly switch off like a light. Yes, our bodies do. Our bodies die, and eventually, although I feel that our bodies die slowly. I don't think that they just, when somebody dies, I feel that there's still energy retained within the body, and it's because it's been a part of us. It's been a part of our souls, and so, but I don't fear death now. I mean, it helps me tremendously, because it also helps me with. I mean, I lost my mother 18 months ago, and it helped me to deal with that. Obviously, it was awful going through the physical loss of losing my mother. I loved her really dearly, and but it was great to know that she was being looked after and she was going to a beautiful place. I knew exactly where she was going, and that was wonderful to know that.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss.
So thank you. Yeah.
At what point did you come back into your body when you were at the hospital?
It was pretty much after I'd seen the tunnel of white light and I'd had this, then I turned around and said those words, this is God, this is the source of all creation. And I remember I laid back and I was like laughing with all this joy because it was such a fantastic experience. And it was at that point that I came crashing back into my body. And all the pain came rushing back as well. Everything came rushing back. And the one thing I remember is the noise and the light was just overkill, the over sensory kill, whatever you call it. It was just like, oh, just turn it down, It was just so yeah, that was at that point that I came back. So I was still, they were just about to take me into surgery, so I was still ready to go in, and that's when I came back.
When you're talking about the glaring light, it reminded me there's a T.S. Eliot poem where he talks about earthly light being an imitation of the uncreated heavenly light.
Oh, brilliant. That's great.
I'm amazed that T.S. Eliot didn't have to go through an experience such as yours in order to reach that insight.
Yeah, but he was there though on that. That's great, yeah. Because as I say, when I looked into those 3 grids of light and also the tunnel of white light itself, the light was so intense that I wouldn't be able to look into it. If it was electric or sunlight, that brightness would be too much for the eyes to be able to handle.
Well, your experience in itself was amazing, but what really amazes me is that coming out of it, you've been able to communicate it not only through words and speaking and writing a book, but through painting and music.
That's right. Yeah, that came afterwards. Yeah, it all started pretty much when I came around from the first 8-hour operation. I was lying there, and part of me was dealing with the actual trauma of the accident and the shock, thinking, "Wow, what has just happened?" But a huge part of me was going, "Wow, what just happened there?" The NDE, which I knew nothing about near-death experiences. I figured that I was the only person it had happened to at that point. So I thought, I can't forget any of this. I've got to, I've got to somehow document it. I was really scared I'd forget it all. So I thought, I'm going to do a painting. I'm going to do like a big Renaissance style painting that you talked of earlier, because I figured that's how they do it. Those big Michelangelos. So I decided. So when I got out of hospital, that was the first thing I did. Was I started painting what I'd seen in the afterlife, and I was apprehensive about doing it, obviously, because I'd got no, formal training to do this. And I thought, well, how am I going to be able to put this onto this big canvas that I've just gotten myself into? But once I started, it was amazing because I realized afterwards that I was channeling ideas through. I was being helped to do this. Like paint was going onto the canvas, and colors were coming through, and shapes and forms and life was starting to come immediately, and I was really excited by it all. And so yeah, it was great because once I'd done that first one, I just couldn't stop. I was like prolific, and I kept going.
Wow.
I was very lucky. I bumped into some people who are friends of my sister's who ran a yoga Pilates center, and they said, "Look, we've got a spare studio space that you can use for a week. It's free. We won't charge you." I said, "That's great." But of course, I didn't finish after 1 week, and they said, "Oh, we love having you here. Just carry on. We'll move you around." And I ended up staying there for 2 years with no charge. So that was brilliant.
Wow. Well, I studied art in college. I've done some painting, and I tell you, that's the most ambitious start to an art career I've ever heard. Is you painting a heavenly experience?
Yeah, I know. Looking back on it, it was pretty ambitious.
You were packing everything into that first painting.
That's right. I packed everything into that first painting because I was scared that I was not going to get it all in there, And I thought, once I'd done that, I thought, yes, there it is. It's documented because, like all people who have NDEs, you've got a purpose. You've been sent back for a reason. That's what you feel, and so you're trying to find what that reason is and how I'm going to tell the world about this. That was my big thing. Once I'd spoken to friends and family about it, I thought, more people need to know about this because it's just amazing, So, so my paintings started getting a bit more prolific, and I was doing more and more of them, and then I went on to start writing music, and that came about because I started going to spiritual healing. I'd found this spiritualist church which was in the town where I was recovering my sisters. And I went along to one of their services, which was great. And at the end, somebody came up to me because I got all this plastic all holding me together at that point, and on my left arm. And this lady turned around, a German lady called Maria, and she said, "Oh, we do spiritual healing here. You look like you could do with some." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Great. When do you start?" She said, "Thursday." So I came along, and I kept going, and it really did help me, not just heal sort of physically, but also, helped me emotionally and with all the trauma of the accident. And anyway, a lot of these spiritualist healers were clairvoyant, and they would give messages at the end of the healing sessions, just short things, just like, "Oh, I just saw like a blue light coming through you," or "when I was healing you." But after a few weeks of this one healer that was healing me called Joy kept picking up the music and classical music and violins, and I said, I can't take that. No, I don't know. No idea, And then one week, then she turned around and she said, "They're telling me that you're going to write some music about your experience." So I thought, okay, let's do it. Let's go for it. So I couldn't play guitar anymore because my left arm was so bashed up. But I got this old cheap synthesizer, and I just pulled that out and started trying to write what I thought was going to be a song to start off with. And it didn't really develop into a song. But then one day I'd woken up and I'd heard like this little chord progression come through, and I just thought, right, record that. All I got was an old cassette recorder, and I just recorded this chord progression. And I thought, this sounds like it could be more. This could be for an orchestra to play. So I kept developing it and developing it. I'd met a cellist at this point who used to come into the yoga center, Pilates center, where I was doing my paintings for a while. And we got chatting over coffee one day. And she said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I've just been working on a piece of music, actually." And she was very spiritual, so she knew all about my NDE. And I said, "It's about my experience." She said, "Oh, right." She said, I said, "I think it could be played by an orchestra. That's what it feels like." And she said, "Oh," and she laughed. She said, "Maybe we could do it, And I thought, that'd be good. So again, I got this kind of no sense of boundaries. I thought, let's do it. We've done the paintings. Let's get an orchestra to perform this piece, which was about my experience. So I just kept working at it. And my brother, who's classically trained, he helped me out. He said, "Look, I've got some software that you can attach to your computer, and when you play the notes on your keyboard, it will then transpose it into musical notation." And so that's what I did, and got it all printed off.
You had to do that for every single instrument?
Yeah, every single one. I mean, I started hearing sounds, in my head. Again, I was being helped when I was writing this big time. But this was more than ever I could. By then, I was seasoned at knowing when I was channeling ideas through. I was going, "Oh, right, that's great." So they're helping me to hear sounds and textures. I'd hear like a distant sort of horn sound, and then I'd phone my brother and say, "Right, that's a French horn you want there." I go, "Great." So I just write that in as a part. I mean, it's crazy because I still can't read or write musical notation, and I've written quite a few classical pieces since, and I've turned up to rehearsals, with the orchestra, and it's like, if they realize I can't read or write music, they're going to be thinking, "What?" But it all came together, and so they performed it. They said, "We'll do it. We'll play it." And it was great because they said, "Look, would you mind saying a few words to the local press because you've written this piece?" And I said, "No, of course." So the local press phoned me up, and they said, "Oh, you're the guy who went under the train," And I was going, "That's right," And then they said, "Listen, yeah, this is a great story. This is going on the front page." So it did. Yeah. And from then on, the phone kept ringing, and then the BBC said, "Oh, we want to come and film you and interview you at the rehearsal." So the concert sold out 2 weeks in advance, which is great. So I knew I was being helped again. I was being helped by my guides to pull this synchronicity together to make all this happen. And the actual performance was just like beautiful. The atmosphere in that room was fantastic because it was so packed and everyone was so happy in the orchestra. All the promoters were just gleaming at me. They're going, "This is amazing." They were just so happy. And Yeah, and it was beautiful. It's a wonderful experience to be able to sit on the front row with your family and hear a whole orchestra perform something that you've just written on this little old cheap synthesizer. It's
Wow.
like a 3-dimensional stereo, It's brilliant. Yeah.
How many instruments did you write the score for?
I think it's a chamber orchestra, so I think it's about 32 in all the parts. I think it was a sort of, I can't remember now. There's a lot. There was a lot. So, lots of strings anyway, and lots of piccolos and harps and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Wow.
And the brass section as well. You don't realise how important brass is. I always used to think of orchestras as just being string-based violins and cellos, but no, it's like, wow, when you realise that you can get a great sound out of a trombone that gives you the drama and stuff that you didn't even realise was being used. It's brilliant.
In the book, there's a lot of suspense leading up to the concert because people in the classical music world, they're very stoic about the music. And when you showed up at the rehearsal, you were afraid they didn't like the music, or you couldn't read them because they were so poker faced about it.
Exactly, yeah, poker face. That's great. They are that, but I realise now that is that's very much the classical world.
Yeah.
That's how they are. It's just, they're lovely people. They were really lovely because, but I walked in there. I remember the conductor turned around and said, "Oh, the composer's here," and I thought, "Oh no, I'm not the composer. It's just me," And he said, "David, would you say a few words about your piece?" And I said, "No, that's fine. You guys go ahead," because I could see this kind of like, it was all there, and I felt out of my depth totally. And he said, "Come on." So I thought, okay. So I started talking about it, and because it was about my near-death experience, as soon as I started chatting about it, interestingly enough, all these poker faces that phrase you use is great. They suddenly started asking questions all about it, and they were really fascinated by the whole thing, and that made it really work. And so I stepped aside, and then the baton came down, and I was still really nervous. I thought, is this going to work? Have I pulled this off or not? And as soon as the baton came down and those first chords came in that I talked about earlier that I'd written on that synthesizer, worked. And it was, wow, it was just amazing. I thought, well, that's it. I just knew from then on, that's it. I pulled it off. It's going to happen.
Wow. I've got a strong interest in Ralph Waldo Emerson. I've written some books about his philosophy. And he talks about creativity as tapping into the universal mind. And he writes about ways to increase creativity, make yourself more susceptible to tapping into that field that's around us. And it seems that your experience really opened you up to that, and you're getting inspiration just flowing through you.
Absolutely. I agree with what you just said, that phrase, because one thing I do say is you don't have to go through a dramatic accident and a near-death experience to be able to start tapping in to all the things that are authentically meant for you in your life, and I think we can all do it. And I realize now, I can see when people are channeling. I watch, I can watch like footage of Jimi Hendrix playing guitar, and it's like, wow, yeah, he's just totally tuned into another sphere. And he's tapped into the universe big time. He's like, he's not even aware of where his fingers are going on the neck of that guitar, or the way he's performing it. He brings that guitar alive, because he's so charged into it. And many great musicians, and not just musicians, sportsmen as well. You watch a lot of great sportsmen, and they're channeling, they're tuning they're kind of, they're not really focusing, they're not concentrating that hard, which is something we can all do, because we try too hard, we concentrate too hard all the time, and it's not always a good thing.
Do you have any particular advice for those of us who haven't had an experience like yours on how we can tap into that creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one way of doing it for me is initially is to start off with meditation, if you can, any form of meditation and spiritual healing, like I had, because it helps you to ground yourself, and it helps you to let go of what's going on in your life, all the busyness of your life, and that's what it's all about, is letting go of the busyness. And It's like when we drive a car, for example. When we drive a car, we're not really, we're concentrating on what we're doing, and we're looking in the mirror, we're checking we're not going to crash and stuff. But we're not in the thinking mind zone. We're not suddenly going, oh my goodness, I'm in this vehicle that's traveling at 70 miles an hour or whatever, or kilometers an hour, and this is really fast, and I'm driving it, and I've got my hands on the wheel, and I could crash. You don't think like that. Your conscious mind takes over, and it's a bit like that. So it's a bit like allowing yourself to get away from trying too hard and focusing too hard, trying to think too hard, just being in the moment. It's like the power of life is in the present, basically. So it's just try to be in the present. Forget about all the worries that happened yesterday or 1 hour ago or 10 minutes ago. Forget about all that, because it's done. It's done with. It's finished. It's in the past. It doesn't exist anymore. And also forget about the future. Stop worrying about what's going to happen in your life. And once you get rid of all those busy thoughts, then you're able to tap in and allow. Well, in my case, I allow my guides to help me to come through and allow me to bring through ideas, and I trust in them.
Would you say that we're each here on Earth for a reason? And would that be to accomplish something, like to create specific works of art like you, or is it a different kind of reason that we're here?
I think that, yes, we're all here for a reason, and all for different reasons. We're not all, we don't have to be all artistic or creative or musical, as I say, great sportsmen and great engineers, great scientists, that's but a lot of us don't find that. You see, I know I didn't find my true path. I didn't find my authentic path, and I think once you find that, life begins to, synchronicity starts to take place, and doors will slowly open for you. And I think we've all got that there, but far too many of us don't have time to do that, because we're so bogged down with our domestic lifestyle or what have you, and that all the time we're thinking, right, I've got to go out and earn money. And once we've got enough money, then I've got to go out and buy food. I've got to get food on the table. I've got to bring my family up, and I've got to do all these things. It's all, I've got to do this. And so there's no sense of actually stopping and realizing. Actually, funny enough, I would say that throughout this whole pandemic over the last year, that especially at the beginning, an awful lot of people did find that moment. I found it quite interesting that when everybody went into lockdown, so many people were getting creative. They were seeing all these Zoom things on the news, and showing people like dancing, having fun, writing music, doing paintings, teaching their kids, baking bread for the first time, all these things, all this. So that was almost like, everyone was given a chance to stop the busyness and actually allowing this stuff to come through, and it was happening there and then.
And expressing ourselves in that way, is that a big part of the reason for life and why we're here?
Basically, what I realize is that this planet that we live on is pretty amazing. It's a beautiful planet, and it's a beautiful place, and there's so much to venture into and enjoy that we don't really think about. We don't figure, not just the planet and the nature itself, but just the existence of our lives. It's just really, we're so lucky. It's just really beautiful what we've got, and I certainly didn't appreciate any of that before. I really didn't, and I didn't allow myself to, and now I do. Yeah.
I'll read another sentence from your book that stood out to me. This is one of the spiritual healers talking to you. She says, "The spiritual part of our being has a plan for our life, giving us experiences that teach us to feel more connected to who we really are, to our divinity." Thought that was a interesting statement. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's actually going on from what I've just been talking about. Actually, yes, our spiritual path is there. It's as long as we can get in touch with it, and we allow ourselves to get in touch with our authentic selves, then we'll be guided. We'll be helped. The universe wants us to grow and develop. The universe wants us to create, and I don't mean just music and art, just create our lives and become happier than what we are. So she worded that really well. But it's just, as I say, it's trying to discover. We've all got a higher consciousness, which is there. When I talked about that first being of light that I saw, the androgynous one, I realised now that was really what I was looking at, was my higher self. Because, as I say, I felt I knew that person really well, and that's because that being was me. That was my higher self. And so, once we get in touch with our higher selves, that's when we start to understand what our true paths are in life, and that they will unfold and come to us.
Well, David, the name of the podcast is Living from the Soul, and you're a shining example to me of someone living from your soul, living from your deepest self.
Thank you.
It's an honor to speak with you, and thanks so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to Living from the Soul. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, subscribe, and review. This is an ad-free podcast brought to you by my books, which are available at samtarode.com. The theme music was created by Gideon Tarode.